Thank you very much. Again, Greg Schleppenbach, my wife Jacqueline, and we are really privileged and pleased to be able to be with you and be invited to share our story with you because we feel so blessed. We met late in life, and we think that our story about meeting and dating and marriage is one of hope and one of miracles. And some pretty great lessons that we learned along the way through our process of dating and getting married. Again, we were both in our 40s when we met. We had never been married before. We were living half a country apart. I was living in Nebraska, lived my whole life in Nebraska until 2.5 years ago when I moved out here. Jacqueline lived in this area. And we were introduced by a married couple that we both know, friends of ours. I had dated quite a bit through my adult life and never really found anybody that I felt compelled to want to marry until I met Jacqueline, who is not only my wife, but truly my best friend. So hard to imagine at this stage in life that we could meet somebody who just is my soulmate. And so we feel so blessed that God has brought us together, really, truly a miracle that we came together. We'll tell you more about that. That we feel called by God to share our story and give hope to others out there who are looking for lifelong love.
Before you think, did you say after 40? That I'm not getting married after 40. Did anybody think that? Yeah. I thought the very same thing. In fact, I thought, I just don't want you to tune out starting now because I want you to know that I had the exact same thoughts. In fact, I knew when I was in my 20s and 30s, I would hear about people getting married at like 38, 39, 40, and I would think, why? What's the point? I mean, like, isn't it over by then? And then I just thought, I mean, just between you and me, I would tell the Lord, I mean, seriously, Lord, if it's after 40, just like, can somebody just push me in front of a bus and get it over with? I mean, I don't want to do that, okay? Like, that's not what I'm after. I'm after, like, marriage, family, the whole bit, okay? Soon. And on my timeline. But it was such a depressing thought to me to even consider that I could hardly bear it.
So by the time we met, you know, both of us were kind of at that stage where in life where we just sort of thought, well, we've dated quite a bit, haven't met that right person, you know, it's possible that maybe we're not being called to marriage. And I actually even talked to my spiritual director about that. I said, you know, I just come off another relationship that just didn't really go anywhere. And I asked him, you know, is it possible that I'm not called to marriage and therefore I should just stop dating? And ultimately he said, no, you should not stop dating, and encouraged me to do so. And I'm glad he did because it was a short time later that I met Jacqueline.
And at the same time, pretty much to a couple of weeks, across the country here in Washington, I met with my spiritual director, Father Anthony, and I said, you know, I've made peace with this idea of it just being me and God. It's like I was 41, I think, and I just thought, you know, in fact, my peace has been so hard fought for and won, and I mean really hard fought for, that I didn't want to mess it up with dating anymore. I just thought, this obviously doesn't work for me. I'm not very good at it. And so I just told my spiritual director, you know what, I'm just going to stop. And he said, Jacqueline, that sounds like you're giving up. And I said, well, yeah, but in a good way. I mean, like, I'm not bitter. I just don't want to do this anymore. It just takes so much out of me. And I feel like it never leaves me in a good place. I feel like instead of making me more holy, it makes me worse. And I just don't want to do this anymore.
And so we both recognized that there were worse things in life than not being married. And being married to the wrong person is one of them. Making a vocational decision, whether it's marriage or priesthood or religious life or single life, is the biggest decision you'll make in your life. And so very important that you recognize that. And again, that not being married is not the worst thing in life. It's so important that you discern really well who the right person is. We were both very content, fulfilled in our lives, and we weren't looking to get married just to get married. You know, if we wanted to get married only because doing so could help elevate us in who we are who God had called us to be, ultimately to help us get to heaven.
Yeah, and in particular, there were a couple of other examples of why I wasn't interested in getting married, just to get married at that point. I had a number of friends who had been in unhealthy relationships, unhealthy marriages, really struggling, unhappy, getting divorced. And I just thought, wow, I really don't want that, and I really don't need that. And I really only want to get married now if that could make me truly happy, if I feel compelled to do it, and if that's going to make me more holy and a better person. And so I mentioned to my spiritual director during that time, and the things that I mentioned, like I'm not going to date anymore, and he gave me the advice that changed my life. It was miracle advice. So I want you to listen up to this, because it wasn't from me, it was from him, and it really changed my heart. He said, okay, I can see you're a little bit dug in on this, so you don't have to get married or do anything that you don't want to do anymore, but you do have to be open to the love that God has to give to you. So I want you every day to pray, Lord, please open my heart to the love that you have to give to me. And I thought, you know what? I can do that because my Heavenly Father loves me. He's not going to give me anything that's bad for me or anything that's going to make me unhappy. And what that did was it opened my heart to seeing and noticing all that God had blessed me with already. It changed my heart to a heart of gratitude where there was not one before. And I mean, for example, well, in retrospect, when I was really thinking about this, it took me a long time to really process this, but I realized I had really lacked humility and trust in God, and I didn't really accept his whole love for me, because I kind of thought, if he doesn't answer my prayers on my timeline, then he obviously doesn't love me. I mean, that's just the way it is. So one thing I would draw your attention to is that in almost every gospel reading I hear these days, there's something about humility or trust. And it reminds me of how important those two things are for my own happiness in life. There was a time I literally treated this whole notion of getting married as kind of an entitlement mentality, hey, I've served you, Lord. I've done all these things for you. Kind of like the prodigal son, I've done all these things for you. Where's mine? I mean, cough him up, Where is he? And, I mean, it can't be that hard to find me a good husband, is it? I mean, am I that bad? So, well, maybe you can recognize the error of my thinking in this without my extrapolating, but I'll just get into it a little bit more. The problem was that I really did think I deserved it. It was some sort of I do this, you do that, I've worked for this. And the fact that it didn't happen, in the timeline that I was expecting, it made me really feel abandoned. It made me feel abandoned by the Lord. And I just thought, I don't know why this is so hard for you. I'm why is this so hard? And what I understand really in retrospect, after many years to think about it, was that I succumbed to this dual temptation. The temptation to think, God is not powerful enough to deal with this, or he doesn't care. And either one of those is toxic to you, toxic to me. It was toxic to my hope. And I fell into that trap of thinking this. When I did, it made me lose hope in his love for me. I totally stopped thinking about that, that he loved me in a very particular way. That was a dark space to be in, and it caused me to feel hopeless about relationships, and then open to hopeless relationships, ones that would only darken my heart and cause me more pain. You know the kind, perhaps. Those who can never commit to you, who have proven that they are not interested in a real committed relationship, or who just may want to use you. Women innately know, and they have that sense when a guy is no good for them. But if you feel hopeless about your future, which you might if you have these thoughts in your mind, then you may find yourself more vulnerable to them. So conversely, this prayer that Father Anthony gave me, to be open to the love that the Lord has for me, every day I was praying that. And I discovered that his love and his ways are perfect. I can trust him. He created me. He loves me. He loves me perfectly. My loving Heavenly Father will only allow what is best for me in life and for my heart and for my eternal life. And so somehow the Lord used these unhealthy situations in my life, even psychologically and emotionally abusive relationships, to humble me, to teach me about his love for me. My whole, hey, I deserve a great husband attitude totally changed. And I was fulfilled in just receiving him, what he had for me, because I knew whatever he had for me, I could trust it was perfect, whatever it was.
So as I mentioned earlier, we were introduced by a couple that we both know, and this couple does pro-life work. And the husband came out to Nebraska to speak at a Catholic Women's Conference, and I just happened to think, I'm going to reach out and see if we can have lunch while he's in town. And so we did. And during that lunch, we talked about a lot of things, including my personal life. And he asked if I was married, if I was dating, and I wasn't. And so when he came back here, they live in this area, he told his wife, who knew me through my work again, and that he had lunch with me, and she said, "Oh, Greg, how's he doing? Did he ever get married?" And when she found out that I hadn't, wasn't married, wasn't dating, somehow the light bulb went on, and she thought of Jacqueline and putting the two of us together. And so they emailed both of us separately, asked if we'd be interested in meeting a friend of theirs, and my initial reaction was, not really. The idea of a long-distance relationship didn't thrill me too much. I'd had them before, and I just thought, I don't know if I really want another long-distance relationship. It would come out of another relationship that didn't go anywhere not long before that. And so I was hesitant initially, but I thought, I have family out here. I have 3 siblings who live in the D.C. area, and so I thought, well, what the heck, if I come out and take her to dinner and it's a bust, I can spend the weekend with my family.
So, well, it was 2 months after that prayer that Father Anthony gave to me. It was like around February, March that he gave me that. 2 months after that I had started praying that our mutual friends reached out to me as well. And then when I said yes, and he finally said yes, she gave him my phone number, and he had to call me, basically. But she said, his name is Greg Schleppenbach from Nebraska. And it dawned on me at that moment, I had actually spoken to him before on the phone when I was doing consulting work. And the craziest thing happened is that the very brief conversation I had, and I mean it was like 3 minutes probably, came flooding back to my mind. I remember every detail about it. I remember what his voice sounded like. I remembered that I had made up a little story about him before he got on the phone. Schleppenbach, what a name. So, he probably got married at 21 and has 7 kids. He's from Nebraska, for Pete's sake, all right? So anyway, I mean, literally, I remember the sun was shining. I was making all these phone calls. I was sitting on my back patio doing my work. And anyway, I remembered everything about it. But evidently, I was wrong about the 7 kids. So anyway, that was good news.
So I flew out. We made an arrangement for me to come out and take her out to dinner. Flew out here and did that. We had an instant connection. But because I was going to be here for a whole weekend, I thought, well, if it doesn't go so well, I don't really want to plan a whole weekend. So we didn't have any other plans. We just had this dinner on Saturday night. I was here till Monday. And so we decided we were going to get together the next day. We went out to a wonderful vineyard, Paradise Springs, right? Mm-hmm. Vineyard, had a wonderful time, really became even more connected and engaged. And then, not literally engaged.
I mean, just in conversation.
And then Monday, I was to fly back, and Jacqueline was gracious enough to join me to see me off at the airport. And there's where the third really amazing interaction occurred.
So, amazingly, on that Monday, my sister called me. She lives in North Carolina, and she's a businesswoman. She worked with IBM, and she said, hey, I'm flying through Reagan, and I'll be there like for 5 minutes, but like, if you want to, come by and say hi or whatever. But if you don't, no problem, I'll be back in 2 days. And I'm like, okay, well, you know what time are you flying out? And she said, well, around this time, like 6 o'clock. And I said, well, this guy that I just met, I'm bringing to the airport or whatever, we're going to be there for a few minutes. And then so she went through the whole grill of it. All right, who introduced you? Is he viable? I mean, what's going on? And so anyway, so we arranged that she was going to have like 4 minutes, and we would meet her at this gate, and she would like say hi, shake hands, and keep rolling. But that night, I was only supposed to be with Greg until like, I don't know, 6, and then I had to race off to a class. My class got canceled, so I had a little more time to spend with him at the airport. When my sister came in, her flight was delayed an hour and a half, and then Greg's flight was delayed an hour and a half, and we had an hour and a half, all 3 of us, to spend together. Why is this important? Well, first of all, it's kind of a miracle that God could line up all of our schedules like that, just like that. But the other thing is that my parents were deceased. I had no parents for quite some time. And my sister and I were very close, and she was such a big part of my life, and she's also an HR executive, so she knew people, and she could make a judgment call about people like that. So I really trusted her, and I trusted her opinion, and the Lord knew me so well that the second Greg would have gotten on that plane, I would have probably started second-guessing everything I thought. I don't know. Is this? I don't know. He lives in Nebraska. I don't know. So
Nebraska's a good life.
Yeah. It was a little daunting for me to think about it, but anyway. So it ended up that this moment, like, it wasn't even lost on me at that moment how miraculous it was that God had made that arrangement happen, because for me. Well, it just showed me that God was really actually involved in all of these details and had been thinking about them long before I realized he was even thinking about me. And so it ended up being a moment that I reflected on many times during the time of dating and getting engaged, just to see how God, in his particular love for me, had provided that kind of cover of confirmation.
So we both recognized and actually verbalized to each other as we were saying goodbye at the airport that we were both really overwhelmed by what was going on. And we ended up talking by phone every single day but one from that day forward. And until this day, we've been married 5 years now, last November. And we talked and really fell in love over the phone and talked sometimes for hours, which I was stunned by, because I had friends who would speak to their girlfriends for hours on the phone. I'm thinking, what in the world can you talk about for hours? But when you find the right person and you connect, it was natural. And we would even have Skype dates and have dinner together. So I'd be eating dinner on my side and she'd be eating dinner here. And it was really wonderful. We did fall in love with over the phone, long distance. And we got together pretty much every month, back and forth. But about 3 months into our relationship, we kind of hit our first sort of little challenge. We were talking on the phone, and Jacqueline started kind of expressing some reservations about the relationship. And I kind of started freaking out a little bit and didn't probably react very well. And she ended up, after the call, talking to this couple that had introduced us. And the husband said, "Oh, I'm just going to call Greg." And Jacqueline said, "No, please, don't call him, But he did. He called me, and he just said, "Look, Greg, don't freak out about this. I can tell you what this is about. I went through this with my wife when we were dating. It has to do with bad relationships in the past, her father's relationship, and all these kind of things." And he said, and this was the best advice I ever got when I was dating, just be her rock. And which to me meant, stop thinking about how you feel in this and start thinking about how she feels. Start thinking about putting her feelings first over my own. And that helped in a number of occasions during our dating, because there were other times where she had some reservations and hesitations, and instead of me reacting negatively, I remembered that, be her rock, and just think about how she is feeling about this and what she's thinking, and not just about what I think.
So the Lord, like I said, provided all the things that we needed in our little hearts to have the sense of peace that we needed. I was a person who had always had relationship anxiety, and this time it unfortunately wasn't too much different, because even though it started out with such an amazing, overwhelming peace of heart, you know, once you've been dating for as long as I had been and had so many rocky things happen along the way, you don't trust yourself so much sometimes. You have a kind of a little bit of struggle with that. And I had a lot of anxieties that I had to work through, and I had amazing confirmation from different friends who would counsel me along the way. And basically, some of those people showed up all along the way in the most critical moments as we were moving forward, and it was just a real blessing.
So we dated for a year before we got engaged, and there were many signs for me along the way that Jacqueline was the one. I must admit that I never really believed that when people said, when you find the right one, you'll just know. But it truly was the case for us. And some of those signs were, first of all, for me, just a steadiness of heart and mind about my love for Jacqueline. That was something I'd never experienced in anyone else that I had dated. I would fluctuate in my feelings about the person, but I had a real steadiness. Literally, my relationship with Jacqueline was black and white from any other relationship that I had had in my adult life. Rather than turning cold or ambivalent about a relationship, you know, my love for Jacqueline grew daily. I couldn't imagine my life without her. Another sign of that this was the right one was just being comfortable being myself when I was with Jacqueline. I didn't have to try to be somebody else. I could be who I am, and that's an important sign. My certitude about our relationship was confirmed by family and friends, also another very important aspect of finding the right person. And then the thought and discussions of marriage, looking at rings, getting engaged, planning the wedding, the possibility of me moving to DC, didn't freak me out. Those are kind of things that would have freaked me out in previous relationships. It was very natural and exciting, and even on our wedding day, I had absolutely no anxiety or hesitation whatsoever. Something else that we learned through this process, and this is also very important, to keep in mind when you're dating, is that when you find the right one, the devil's going to mess with you. The devil doesn't like marriage. The devil doesn't want you to find your life mate. And he's going to exploit whatever weaknesses you might have. So be very mindful of what those weaknesses are, and be aware that the devil's going to go after that and try to divide you and your future spouse. Throw a wrench into your relationship. Just a couple of examples. This is very minimal, but sort of interesting. So the first weekend I flew out to meet Jacqueline for the very first time, my flight got canceled. I was on a nonstop flight from Omaha to DC on Friday night, got canceled. I ended up having to reschedule on Saturday, and it was an all-day flight, like a 5-hour layover in Dallas or something, and I didn't get in until right before I was supposed to take her to dinner. I actually thought about canceling entirely and coming up with another time to fly out here, but I ultimately decided, no, I'm going to persist. And then, interestingly, 1 year later, when I was flying out to propose, my flight got canceled. And of course, this time I just laughed because it was, you know, I could see what was going on. But even more serious, the night before our wedding, the devil struck again. And I had gotten wrapped around the axle about something that was one of my weaknesses, a financial issue, and got so wrapped around the axle that it freaked Jacqueline out, and almost to the point where she was like wanting to postpone the wedding. And we went to do a holy hour to pray, and while we were there, surprise, surprise, she runs into one of her dear, dear friends who throughout her life has always shown up when Jacqueline needed that guardian angel, and talked her off the ledge. And
this was 10 p.m. at night on Thanksgiving evening, so it's like kind of odd to run into somebody at that hour. You're not expecting to see anybody you know at the chapel. Well, there's a couple things that, as we have reflected on this, that you can do to prepare your heart if there's somebody in your life or if there's not, and even almost better if there's not at the moment, because you can think about, these are practical things. And it's not just my advice, but it's advice from other women that I know who have been through this process. And one is to know yourself really well and to be true to your own heart. You know what kinds of things make you happy. You know what kinds of things you really would like to have in a spouse. And I'm talking to men and women, but my mindset is always that of a woman. But I think it's really helpful for you to know and to be very clear in your mind the qualities that are like must absolutely have. Like, for example, I wasn't true to that. I ended up in a lot of relationships that were no good for me and not really fulfilling. And it was because I wasn't true to myself and I didn't listen to my heart all the time. I could have saved myself some heartache. But one of those things was that I always wanted to be with a man who was a spiritual leader, whose spiritual leadership I could trust, who really had a heart for God. And really, almost no relationship I had prior to Greg was like that. So that's one thing. Be true to yourself. You can make a list of the qualities, like I said. You can make a list of the qualities that in your heart you know are non-negotiable. This is helpful because when you get into sticky situations, you can kind of look at the objective truth of what you know is right for you, and think about those qualities. And being prayerful about it. As you can see, I spiritually struggled with believing that God really loved me and that I could really trust him. As things went on and on and on in my singlehood, I just thought, I don't know about this. But I just didn't really receive the Lord's love for me. And I encourage you to prayerfully remember every day that God loves you. When you trust God, that he sees you and knows exactly what is happening for you and that he loves you, you can be happy. There's other things like good habits, habits of chastity, habits of purity, habits of good hygiene. Good hygiene's good for marriage. So all these kinds of things are things to keep in mind as you're contemplating, just being prepared and open in your heart.
So just a little bit for the guys. The culture of dating today, obviously, is not so good. And I think a lot of times dating becomes very casual, very downplayed, downgraded approach of men pursuing women, of courting women. And it communicates really that this is not important enough to put in any special effort. It shows a lack of seriousness or respect for women and the dating or courting process. So have some class. When you want to ask out somebody on a date, call her and make the date. Don't text her. Make a plan, Plan the whole date. Make it special. That really speaks volumes. I guarantee it. You'll set yourself apart with women if you do that. And whether she's the one or not, putting some effort into it communicates respect for her, for the importance of the dating and courtship process, and also of discerning marriage. And it's good preparation for marriage because you want to take that seriousness and respect into marriage. Some other things important as preparation is just being self-sacrificial. Give of your time, volunteer, do things that you don't necessarily want to do, okay? That's good. You learn to become selfless, and that's very important going into marriage. One of the reasons why we think it's been so easy for us in our 40s to transition into married life, because we tried to live that, to be generous with ourselves and our lives, so it wasn't all just about me and what I want to do, but about what is good for the other. Even just having roommates, learning to live with other people can be helpful.
So hindsight is the easy thing. 2020, now we know what we didn't know then. But we can see much more clearly. The gift is that this whole process massively increased our trust in God. And so we can see how God prepared us even along the way. Like those thoughts that I had that the Lord doesn't know what's happening with me, he doesn't even see this, he doesn't really care, was totally untrue. And I could see in retrospect how he had done these little things along the way, including that silly phone call 3 years ago, 3 years before I had met Greg. So that was just examples. We can see how he was involved the whole time, including having parallel conversations half a country apart on the very same subject of not dating anymore, giving it up and so forth, and being encouraged by our spiritual directors. So I guess in hindsight, we just see how much God had been involved in every aspect of it all. And I want to give you hope. He's involved in every aspect of your life, too. He sees your heart. He sees what you want. And as I look at this room of young women and young men, I just think, you know, my heart is so for you. Don't settle. Don't think, oh, 25, I was going to be married by 25. I was going to be married by 30, maybe 35. But, you know, I just need to get on with it. I just need to find somebody. Don't do that. Don't do that. I got married finally at 44, and I don't regret it. I don't regret it for a second. I would never have been married to anybody else, and I would not have been happy if I had been.
So we hope that our story gives you some hope that lifelong love in marriage is possible, but we can't conclude our remarks without saying something about love, what it is. You know, this is a term that's thrown around willy-nilly and, you know, becomes sort of meaningless. Love is really a sacrificial gift of self for the good of the other, and in marriage, that's your spouse. Before Vatican II, there was an exhortation before marriage that was read just before the couple said their vows, and I just want to share a couple of excerpts. We actually included this in our marriage, and I think it is a beautiful explanation of marriage and married love, and I encourage you to look it up. Just look up Exhortation Before Marriage, Catholic Church. You'll find it online. It's just a little excerpt. My dear friends, you are about to enter upon a union which is most sacred and most serious. It is most sacred because it was established by God himself. By it, he gave to man a share in the greatest work of creation, the work of the continuation of the human race. And in this way, he sanctified human love and enabled man and woman to help each other live as children of God, by sharing a common life under his fatherly care. Because God himself is thus its author, marriage is of its very nature a holy institution, requiring of those who enter into it a complete and unreserved giving of self. This union then is most serious because it will bind you together for life in a relationship so close and so intimate that it will profoundly influence your whole future. That future, with its hopes and disappointments, its successes and its failures, its pleasures and its pains, its joys and its sorrows, is hidden from your eyes. You know that these elements are mingled in every life and are to be expected in your own. And so not knowing what is before you, you take each other for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health until death. And because these words involve such solemn obligations, it is most fitting that you rest the security of your wedded life upon the great principle of self-sacrifice. And so you begin your married life by the voluntary and complete surrender of your individual lives in the interest of that deeper and wider life which you are to have in common. Henceforth, you will belong entirely to each other. You will be one in mind, one in heart, and one in affections. And whatever sacrifices you may hereafter be required to make to preserve this mutual life, always make them generously. Sacrifice is usually difficult and irksome. Only love can make it easy, and perfect love can make it a joy. And if true love and the unselfish spirit of the perfect sacrifice guide your every action, you can expect the greatest measure of earthly happiness that may be allotted to man in this vale of tears. Let me tell you, we've experienced that. We've experienced that joy and that love and that happiness, and we want that for each and every one of you who are called to marriage. Thank you.
So I don't have a beloved with me, but I've been married for 13 years. I married my wife very quickly. When you find what you want, you get it very quickly. So I did, and to quote Beyonce, I put a ring on it. And so I have a very different sort of story and perspective. I'm a theologian at the University of Notre Dame, where I teach a course on marriage. I teach this course on marriage to 150 undergraduates because rates of marriage have declined in Roman Catholicism at 14% in the last 7 years. And over now having taught roughly 1,000 students on the sacrament of marriage, I've come to a conclusion that there are two problems that are actually related. And the problem is that love is actually a very powerful experience. Shakespeare knew this, Petrarch knew it, Taylor Swift knows it. And it's a powerful experience insofar as it sort of takes up our being. And there's two mistakes we make with love, I'd say. Mistake number one we make with love is that we reduce it to a powerful experience that's sexual and physical, right? Hooking up, which is sort of prevalent, they roughly estimate around 20% of Catholic institutions participate in hooking up. DC is probably 97.3% of bars right now in the area. Tinder, swipe left, swipe right. I don't know which way, but swipe. And what this does, of course, it's not just sexual, right? People have been interested in having sex for quite some time. What it is a failure and a fear of deep and abiding communication, of communion. It's really difficult to stand in front of another human being and say, I'm yours. I want to be with you. I want to deal with crap with you. Like, not just like exotic, romantic things, but I want to change your tire. I want to move your refrigerator. Right? And so hooking up allows for this communion that's physical, devoid of a sort of deeper spiritual communion, which we crave. Second, and the other I call, and I sort of don't mean to insult this, but a kind of a cult of the soulmate, which is this. There is no human being who will complete you. Human beings do not complete you. I've been married for 13 years. I love my wife. I also like my best friend Lenny, who I was hanging out with last night. We have different and distinct relationships, and if I demand that Kara provides for me some sort of perpetual, transformative encounter, no wonder no human being can meet that. No human being can do that. We leave them. My favorite story, I had a friend who was dating someone. She went on like 3 dates with the guy and was like, I don't know, I'm not feeling anything. I was like, that's stupid. You have to go on 5 more dates. And she's like, I don't want to go on. Just go. They're married with a child now. Because it turns out life is not about feeling. Life is not about perpetual affection, and nor is love. So let me say 3 things from the sacrament of marriage, which I think can sort of guide us. I'm not going to give dating advice, though I'll be happy to do so in the question-answer period. I give it all the time to my students. But let me just say 3 things real fast. One, in the Roman Catholic sort of theology of the sacrament of marriage, nature matters and love matters. And love, at a sort of natural level, isn't reducible to affections. It's not reducible to some sort of feeling ooh. Love is recognizing and promoting and desiring the good of the other. And when you fall in love, you should like really rock that. When you really love another human being and long for their good, you should commit to that. The number of students I meet who are like, I don't know, I'm thinking about putting off marriage. How long? Well, I don't know, like, how long have you been dating this person? 5 years. Well, why are you putting it off? I don't know, I'm just not sure. What are you not sure of? It's been 5 years. Like, I'm not an impetuous person, but 5 years seems a long time to wait to engage in a series of random events. Love is to desire the good of the other. It's the natural good of friendship. Love is not functional, and even in the Roman Catholic Church, love is not first and foremost about some sort of sexual encounter. It's friendship. It's the desire for the renewal of a friendship for the ultimate good of the other. So love is ultimately this deep and abiding friendship, a longing of the good of the other. I knew my wife loved me, not when we held hands, not when we went to dances, but when I was in graduate school and got deathly ill with a stomach bug. And I was like a shell of a self, having vomited all day. And then my wife came over, which, by the way, like, that is alone an act of love, because now she's made herself susceptible to the illness that has affected me. And she sat with me and provided me one ice cube every 10 minutes, which is how she learned to not vomit up all the water that I wanted. I wanted to drink water. She's like, you can have this ice cube. 10 minutes later, you can have another ice cube. That's love. Number 2. Love in the Roman Catholic Church is not sort of reducible to the affections, but is an objective reality. It's a bond. It's the sacramentum of the sacrament of marriage. That objective bond that comes in when you say, I, Tim, take you, Kara. You probably won't say that unless your name is Tim and you're marrying Kara. And I, Tim, take you, Kara, to be my wife. I promise to be true to you in good times and bad, in sickness and in health. I will love you and honor you all the days of my life. That objective bond is the hypothesis of your life. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean, it's the ultimate abiding what Luigi Giussani meant by hypothesis. It's that hypothesis that determines every element of your existence. It is objective. It's not about how I feel. I don't always wake up madly in love with my wife. I've been married 13 years. Sometimes I wake up and I think to myself, my back hurts. That's my first thought. My wife and I had a remarkable transformative date in December in which we booked airline tickets. That's it. That is not a sort of demonstrative of a dearth of love. That is the reality that guides our life, that charism, that bond of love that the sacrament creates. That's the objective nature of that love. Lastly, marriage transforms the mundane. Dear friends, our lives are boring. And I don't mean this in any way sort of to make you feel sad. They just are. The last exciting birthday of your life is 25 when you can rent a car. And they even took away that law, so in some places. So that's, after that, it's a lot of the same thing. Every day until you die. The word of the Lord. No, okay, so... But you know what? Isn't that the remarkableness of the incarnation? The Word became flesh, became infant, entered the particularities of the human condition. And that's what's redeemed in marriage. A lot of people speak about marriage as a transformative encounter in which the high point is sexual intercourse. It's not. The high point is knowing that there's someone there who's going to take out the trash. That there's someone there who calls you when you're traveling. I'm on the road a lot. My wife calls me on my birthday with all the kids. We have 2 kids. We've adopted both kids. Well, I can talk about that separately, but we've adopted our kids, 6 and 1, Tommy and Maggie. Maggie's 1 and going on 35. But the most mundane aspects of the human condition are redeemed in marriage, in family life. And that family life, thus, is not some sort of special unit separate from the rest of the world to say, like, okay, this is my family and this is my family of love, and no one else can enter into it. But rather, if we form these communions of love, it should sort of transfigure the cosmos. but mundanely. Through friendship, through care, through concern, for waking up in the middle of the night and wiping up your children's vomit. And that's actually, I think, how to renew dating. You want to go on an exciting date? Come over to my house and I'll help you. You can wipe up my children's vomit. So I'd be more than happy to have you over. And I think now we have a chance then for conversation and questions. Thanks.
So if we have questions, we have mics set up over here on my left and over on the right. So if you have a question, please come up right now.
Hi, thank you guys for speaking. My question is, I love the sacraments, and I think the sacrament of marriage is so beautiful. However, it crushes me to know that I can't marry the person that I love within my church. So my question to you is, within the LGBT community minority within the Catholic Church, what kind of advice would you give to those dating that is either frowned upon within the church or, et cetera, like that?
I'll give you no advice that satisfies you. So I'll start there. I suspect. The advice that I give is this. Married love is not the only love. And to me, one of the things that I think has been very risky with a kind of elevation of human sexuality within the church is almost this sacrament unto itself, right? That the ultimate pinnacle of existence is getting married and having children, is that there's no other form of life that actually sort of can exist within the church except that. Like, if you can't do that, then your life is a miserable disaster. But that, to me, is not the sort of reducible to the fullness of human flourishing. And so I take as very real your challenge and your situation. And within the church, there are modes of life and forms of love that are not reducible to sexual love. And as I said, this was not a sufficient answer to your question. But it is still nonetheless the case that friendship, companionship, non-sexual love is part of salvation, not reducible to marriage. And if you look at sort of actually the history of marriage as a sacrament, one of the arguments was that actually it kind of exists as a unique sort of strange event. It really wasn't until Trent that there was a sort of discussion about marriage as a sacrament, precisely because there were all these sort of fruitful forms of what were called states of life that were not reducible to marriage as sort of the fullness of human flourishing. And so I can give you no sort of advice that I think will sate your desire, because I'm a professor of theology. I send the mandatum. I'm giving you the church's teaching. But what I can say to you is that you can have forms of love in your life, and should, and God be praised, we all do, that isn't reducible to romantic love. And that the heart of marriage is friendship, and that friendship is available in a variety of modes.
I really enjoyed what you all said. I got a lot from it. My question is about, it's for anyone, is about when you're dating, and then the realm of like discernment comes in, right? Like you should discern who you're dating. And sometimes you're like, am I overthinking it? Am I over spiritualizing it? The 5th date, that's too much. Maybe like 3 dates, So like when do you realize like you should just calm down and let time go? Or maybe you should pray more. Or like maybe you shouldn't. Or, like, what do you do?
Go, please. You get this one.
I don't know. I don't think I have the perfect answer for you. I think your heart has to kind of walk through this. There's no easy, perfect formula for any of this, I don't think. But I think really, really praying a lot throughout the whole thing is a good idea, for sure, because you want to be clear in your head. I do think we, as women, some of us, can tend, all of us probably do this to some degree, but tend to overthink things. And sometimes you just have to sit back, maybe be objective about the situation. Like, what do I know about this guy? Is he a good guy? Is he a good guy? Is he kind of in my, all right, he's a good guy. Looks like a good guy. He's a cute guy. So I mean, I would just, kind of try and be as objective as you can. I also found that one thing that was good for me and for us was having other people who are very close to you, who know you very well, look at how you are with him and him with you. I think that's very helpful. People said to me, and still say to me today, I like the fact that you guys are so at ease with one another, and you kind of always have been. And that was, that's nice to know that people see that and think that, but that's helpful. It is helpful when people who really know you well can look at the situation and ask you good questions because they know you and they love you. So.
Yeah, I would agree. I think you can overthink this too much. I think, just go enjoy yourself, all right? And be aware of... Be aware of the signs. Try to be objective. I'm going to say it. Stay away from the physical. It only clouds your judgment. Very important. Many of the breakups of marriages come because of engaging in premarital sexual activity. It clouds your judgment. We've seen it in many friends whose marriages broke up. The signs were there in advance, and they didn't see them because they're in love. Because sexual activity affects you physiologically. It bonds you physiologically. And so you're going to not see things that you should be seeing in your discernment. So very important that you stay careful about that and be in tune to the signs that can guide you to whether this is the right decision or not. Certainly praying together is very important. Going to Mass together, praying together, and follow your heart and have fun.
Yeah, small note about discernment. I find, having worked with undergraduates, they use the word discernment to mean I don't want to make a commitment. It can exist. It's like, well, I'm discerning this thing because I don't want to do it. And so don't over-discern. At some point, you have to ask yourselves, I don't mean this in a sort of negative sense, but you have to ask yourself, like, is this the person that I'd like to raise a kid with? If the answer to that is potentially yes, that might be the most sort of ultimate discernment that's necessary. God doesn't tend to sort of speak using direct words unless you're Moses.
Hi. So my question is, how would you go about dating someone who is a good person but isn't Catholic or a non-practicing Catholic?
By good person, do you mean that he shares your faith in Christ, or what do you mean?
No,
He's
no,
not.
just a
He
good
doesn't.
person.
He doesn't have faith at all.
I'm just making up the question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Run.
What's his name?
Run. See, raise your hand.
It's not me.
You're asking for someone else.
We have a potential to baptize lots of people here,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. We're in good shape. We've got you covered. I don't recommend it. I really, really, really don't recommend it. I mean, I think you can. The Lord Himself's like, don't be unequally yoked. I have to say, if you have a strong faith in the Lord, I think that, and your faith is important to you, that seems to me to be one of those, that's one of the non-negotiables, I think. I know that there are exceptions out there, and there are exceptions to the rule, and they make it through. That wasn't something I wanted or could have or could even think about having in my life. But I just think that's the thing. I mean, basically, the Lord said it Himself. Don't be unequally yoked. And I think it's because life is hard. When you hit rough spots, and there's lots of them, there's daily rough spots sometimes, challenges in work, challenges in my work, whatever, I mean, you want to have somebody that you can come together with at the end of the day and pray about these things with. And if you can't do that, I would think it'd be pretty lonely.
I would just add, I mean, I think it is possible. I think it depends a little bit upon, again, I mean, the ultimate goal of marriage is that you're helping each other get to heaven. And so if that person can still help you get to heaven, whether they're a believer or not, you know, I wouldn't rule it out. I've family members who have spouses who are not Catholic and don't even really necessarily practice the faith, and they have, I think, good, healthy, happy marriages. So it's not to say it isn't possible, but you got to know yourself too, and you got to know your own faith and your strength. You know, is this something that's going to elevate you, or is it something that's going to challenge your faith? Faith is huge. I mean, one of the things that's so wonderful and miraculous about our relationship is that it's everything. It's physical attraction. It's spiritual engagement and attraction. It's intellectual and personality attraction, and all of that's important. And in fact, the faith and the personality, intellectual attraction accentuates the physical attraction. You know, our ability to talk with one another and enjoy each other and share our feelings, deep feelings, is very romantic, and it accentuates the beautiful gift of conjugal love. So all those things are very important. It isn't to say that, again, it's not possible if you don't have all three.
So I heard your stories, and I realized that maybe I had jumped to a conclusion because I heard both of you say that, all right, God, maybe I'm just not supposed to be married. And I completely relate to that because I actually personally I was just like, okay, God, well, I'm not upset. I'm not like unhappy. Like, you know, I'm in my career. That's awesome. All right, so I'm not supposed to be married. But so, and then you said that you went to your spiritual director and they were just kind of like, okay, well, no, you're not done. Continue going. So I'm going to take heed to this and just kind of be like, all right, God, so this is you telling me to not just like kind of give up on that. But at the same time, what advice would you give to the fact that, you know, in between, it's like, you know, you hit many challenges, especially like a young adult or a young professional, you know, in your 30s, and you're just kind of like, all right, well, I'm working every day. You know, you do, like he was saying, you do the mundane. What advice would you give going from relationship to like finding the one? I guess like discerning how you discern him from or her from the others, that she was the one, and how you, I guess like sorry, I've had a lot of coffee. How you would, you know, get from each relationship, and I understand probably taking lessons from each one and using it to help you in your current marriage. But so I guess the question is just, how did you get to that point where you were like, okay, he's the one, and it's like, I had the question in my head while I was waiting, and then yeah.
It's okay. You can interject. I can't even. You can interject while I'm talking too, if I'm like not getting at what you're asking. So
I wasn't really clear, to be honest.
Well, it's okay. So I'm inviting you to converse. So the thing I would say is that one prayer that I prayed made a big difference in my mindset and in my heart. And so, and I give that advice to every woman I know, which is, Lord, and I can give it to men too. You can use it as well. But just Lord, let my heart be open to the love that you have for me today. Let him fill you with, you know, the knowledge that he loves you. And
right.
I can tell you that when you really honestly pray that prayer from the heart, you're very satisfied by what you notice. You know, gratitude does fill your heart for all that is good that is already here in your life, because you're surrounded by it. You know, you're here. You're here in the midst of all these beautiful people who love the Lord as well. Yeah. I think that there's some fulfillment that comes from that. And then how did I get there? Well, honestly, all I did was say yes. And like, it's beautiful what Pope Francis was saying here in his remarks beforehand, because he was like, Mary's yes. When she said yes to the Lord, it was, all I did was just say, okay, you know, actually, it took, I had been really about saying no before that, you know, and I had told that to my spiritual director, and that's why he gave me that advice. But the thing was that it was so healing for me, and it took away the sense of vulnerability in which I had approached dating before. I was always looking for somebody to complete me, kind of, someone else to make me happy besides God. And when that didn't happen, I just was like, it was frustrating, and it was a big letdown all the time. But when I was really satisfied by God, because I could see all that he was doing in my life, then I was really ready to be open. And I think that's my little bit of advice.
I just want to add, God's timing is far better than our timing. Jacqueline and I could have met earlier in our lives very easily. In fact, we know we were in the same room on probably a couple of occasions because we have many common friends out here in the DC area, and I used to come out to the March for Life and other kinds of things, and we know we were probably at similar parties. She's involved with the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast, and I had gone to that. We could have easily met at an earlier time in our lives, and we didn't. And it's probably good we didn't, because I doubt that we would have connected the way we did when we met at the time. God's timing is far better than our timing.
Okay, well, I guess my question is, how did you know within yourself and with your significant other that you were ready to take the next step to go from dating to marriage?
You know, for me, as I mentioned in my remarks, my dating and relationship with Jacqueline was black and white from any other relationship that I had had. The signs of steadiness in my own heart for her, my love for her was literally growing every day and with every phone call and every time we were together. It sort of naturally and organically came together, and it just was. I don't know what else to say besides that. That it just you just know. It's pretty clear.
I was a 23-year-old. I had no idea. None. Not that kind of idea. I don't know what life is. You don't know what life is at 23. My wife and I would experience infertility, loneliness, things that we could not have conceived on our own. What I knew was this, is the vow matters. And the vow is the kind of thing that you take that makes that person the one. The vow makes them the one. I don't care. I tell my students this all the time. There are perhaps 25 other people I could have married. I don't know. I was 23. But the vow makes that person the one. That is the one. And so for me, that's how I knew. When I said, I, Tim, take you, Kara, to be my wife, I promise to be true to you in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, and I will love you and honor you all the days of my life. And that is the informing identity of my life. So I think actually both of us together sort of present a vision, which is that actually, yeah, it will happen, it can happen late, but it also can happen in that surprising, sudden way that you commit yourself that they are the one. Then they're the one. And that doesn't make it easier. I would not trade away growing up as a stupid 23 to 28-year-old and learning to be a total adult human being with my wife. She and I learned to be human together. And that's the only way we know we're the one. And now we're raising 2 kids, and we're both bad at it a lot. So
he's persistent. I think we should let him ask a question.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. My question is related to the theological virtue of hope and how it relates to people saying yes to marriage.
Well, there's natural hope and there's theological hope. And I would say this for the theological virtue of hope. Marriage bestows to us a vision of what divine life in heaven will be like. This is what the nuptial blessing does in liturgy of the church. It bestows us a vision that this kind of thing gives us a hope. And that hope is not just for contemplation of those who are in married relationships. The greatest hope in my life, in my parish life, are not like my relationship with my wife, which is beautiful. It's actually those couples around me who've committed themselves and provide this vision of love unto the end that's remarkable. Or my grandparents. And I'll just sort of conclude with this story. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, really sort of disastrous case of Alzheimer's. And like all sex appeal is gone. Physical attraction is gone. All that's left is fidelity. My grandfather held her hand as she passed into eternal life, God willing, and said, "I will never let anyone forget you." To me, that is the theological virtue of hope that's possible in marriage, this fidelity that extends beyond time. So I know that's probably not what you were asking, but thinking eschatologically, thinking towards that future that is the ultimate destiny of the theological virtue of hope, which is our enjoyment of life with God, to me that's the sort of icon of that. And that's what nuptial commitment can provide, love unto the end.
I'm giving the non-theological answer on that one, which is just simply that my feeling about hope and hope as it relates to marriage is that I believe that when you see examples of, and us, for example, I could be wrong, but I believe that when you see examples of God's faithfulness in other situations, it can restore you and encourage you. And I have spent a lot of my life figuring out how to quiet the voices of discouragement in my own head and helping to offer that to others, because I know how powerful discouragement can be. And discouragement led me down many paths that were not good for me, and not good for my heart, not good for my spiritual life. And I would just say, I want you to dwell upon what is possible, and that with God, all things are possible. And if you're right now in a space where you're thinking, this whole dating thing isn't going so well, I just want you to know that God loves you in such a particular way that he has all kinds of things in store for you. And you need to believe that. You must believe that. And you can trust him with all of it. So I hope that our story is of encouragement to you, and in your search for the person that you will end up marrying. And I have faith that you will. So that's it.